My world, built on 3 decades of sacrifice, shattered when I heard my only son,
Money will be mine.
the boy I loved more than life, coldly plot my murder for money. I am Eleanor Thorne, and at 62, I thought I had known true hardship. I had survived poverty, the sudden loss of my husband, and the grueling daily labor that turned my hands into calloused maps of struggle. Yet nothing, not the sleepless nights, not the chemical burns on my skin from cleaning industrial kitchens, not the gnawing hunger I often endured so Victor could eat, prepared me for the monstrous truth that awaited me in the back seat of his silver sedan. It was a Monday afternoon, unusually bright for late November. I had baked Victor's favorite honey almond cake, a recipe passed down from my grandmother, and decided to surprise him at his upscale downtown law office. As I coasted into the polished parking garage, I spotted his car. The impromptu idea of hiding in the back to leap out and surprise him took hold, a childlike impulse I hadn't felt in years. The door was unlocked. I slipped in, crouching low behind the passenger seat, the cake box cradled against my chest like a fragile secret. When the doors opened again, Victor slid into the driver's seat. But the tension in the air was palpable, and then Serafina, his wife, took the passenger seat. My smile froze. Serafina's initial reaction to me had always been cool, a subtle disdain for the chipped paint on my old house and the rough texture of my skin. But the words that followed were not cool. They were glacial. "Are you absolutely certain, Victor? The timing must be perfect." Serafina's voice was a flat monotone of cruel efficiency. Victor sighed, a sound of weary impatience, not guilt. "I've told you, Serafina. It's the only way. Mother will have a fall. A very simple, very believable slip on the landing stairs in that mausoleum she calls a home." Mausoleum. The word slammed into me. That house, the tiny, drafty fortress I had fought tooth and nail to keep after my husband's death, the place where Victor had taken his first steps, and where I had nursed him through every fever, was a tomb to them. "The plan is solid," Victor continued, his voice devoid of warmth. "An older woman, living alone, sudden accident. No questions, no autopsy. It frees up the capital immediately." My breath seized in my throat. I couldn't move. I was a silent witness to my own execution. The house alone is appraised at nearly $300,000 now. "And her savings, plus the life policy you convinced her to update," Serafina calculated with perverse pleasure. "That's enough to clear the debt and put the down payment on the Ocean View penthouse. We can finally breathe." Debt. The source of this horror. Victor, now a high-powered corporate lawyer, and Serafina, a socialite who specialized in spending, had accumulated staggering debts funding a lifestyle I could only dream of. My entire existence, the result of 50 years of grueling labor, was simply a liquid asset, a number on a ledger that stood in the way of their desired luxury. Then Victor uttered the names that twisted the knife deeper. "And Robert and Clarissa are still on board, right? They understand the split?" Robert was my elder brother, the only blood relative I had left. Clarissa, his wife, had always been a source of resentment. "Of course," Serafina scoffed. "Richard's business failure hit them hard. Clarissa is constantly whining about how selfish you've been with your hoard. They're desperate enough to take their cut of the insurance. Selfish." That one word echoed the most painfully. I had sold every precious item I owned to keep Victor out of poverty. I had sacrificed my health, my love life, my future, all for him. And they called me selfish. The conversation detailed their plan with chilling precision. The exact step on the creaking wooden staircase, the forged signature on the insurance beneficiary form, the rehearsed look of shock Victor would wear. They even discussed how they would divide my paltry collection of vintage jewelry. When they finally exited the car, laughing about a dinner reservation, I remained frozen. The honey almond cake, forgotten, rolled off my lap onto the floor mat. I finally crawled out of the car, a woman stripped bare of her faith and her identity. Eleanor Thorne, the loving mother, had died in that dark car park. A new, terrifyingly resolute woman took her place. I had to know the full extent of this conspiracy, and I had to fight back. not with tears, but with cold, calculated strategy. I drove home, my heart a hollow, throbbing void, knowing I had to make the most horrifying decision of my life. I had to disappear. The sheer weight of their betrayal pressed down on me, transforming grief into a steely, unyielding core. My first action was not mourning, but investigation. I couldn't confront them. That would only push the plot into the dark corners. I needed proof, undeniable, tangible evidence that would crush their perfect little scheme. I began to study them like a scientist observing specimens. I parked my old sedan several blocks from Victor and Serafina's rented condo, an extravagant place costing 3 times my mortgage. I witnessed their excessive lifestyle firsthand: designer shopping bags, $500 dinner tabs, and the constant tension of being deeply indebted. Victor's lucrative law salary wasn't funding their life. It was barely servicing the interest on their monstrous credit line. My assets weren't a bonus to them. They were a life raft, and I was the obstacle keeping it just out of reach. The following evening, I paid an unannounced visit to my brother Robert. I found him and Clarissa in their living room, the air thick with the scent of cheap liquor and financial anxiety. "Eleanor, what a surprise!" Clarissa managed a strained false smile. Robert looked physically ill, avoiding my eyes. I went straight for the jugular. "Richard, I heard you lost the logistics contract 3 months ago. Why didn't you tell me?" Robert's face drained of color. How did you know?" "It doesn't matter," I said, trying to keep my voice even, though my hands were trembling. "What matters is that you're my brother. Why didn't you ask for help? I have my savings. I could have helped you restructure your finances, maybe lent you a small amount." "A small amount?" Clarissa exploded, tossing her head back in harsh laughter. "Don't pretend, Eleanor. We know the score. You've been hoarding that money for years, turning your back on the rest of us. That money was meant for family." Robert finally spoke, resentment making his voice shake. "You threw every cent at Victor, elevating him to some petty royalty, while I had to scratch and claw for everything. You sold your soul for his college, but when I needed capital for my business, you just said you didn't have liquid assets. You lied." My heart broke again, but this time the pieces were razor sharp. They had created a toxic narrative. I was the cruel, favored sibling, and they were the perpetual victims, fully justifying their greed. "I earned every penny working 16-hour days in silence," I whispered, the pain searing my throat. "I sacrificed everything. I never lied. I just prioritized my son's education over speculative business ventures." Clarissa leaned forward, her eyes glittering with malice. "We know the figures, Eleanor. The house, the insurance, the savings. We know exactly what you're worth." Victor made sure of that. My blood ran cold. They knew the exact totals. Victor had been calculating my death for months, sharing the spreadsheet with his co-conspirators. I left their house that night. The decision cemented. I had to enact the plan immediately. My only ally was Clara, my neighbor for 20 years, a retired emergency room nurse with an unshakable moral compass. I told her everything. She listened, her face passing through shock, outrage, and finally, a fierce, protective resolve. "This is monstrous, Eleanor," Clara said, gripping my hand. "But faking your death. The risks are colossal." "The risk of waiting is death," I countered. "We have to make the accident look real. Heart failure. Common, quick, and rarely warrants an extensive investigation for a woman my age." Clara's medical expertise was my lifeline. She quickly sourced the specific, medically calculated combination of drugs that would induce a deep, comatose state, dropping my vital signs to an almost undetectable level. She also secured the assistance of a retired pathologist, an old colleague named Dr. Hayes, who could intercept my body at the morgue and sign the death certificate discreetly. The final piece of the puzzle, surveillance. Before my death, Clara covertly installed micro-cameras throughout my home, focusing on the living room, Victor's favorite armchair, and my desk. 2 days later, Victor called. His voice was overly solicitous. "Mother Serafina and I want to take you out." "An Italian place. We're concerned about you living alone." The entire dinner was a twisted performance. They questioned me about my dizziness, the loose rug on the stairs, and, most tellingly, insisted I review my will with Victor, the lawyer. They were conducting their final reconnaissance. That night, I moved the last of my essential legal documents and a small cache of cash into Clara's secret soundproofed basement room. I was ready. I was done being the victim. I was preparing to become a ghost, armed with evidence. The day I was scheduled to die, I woke up with a strange, unnerving calm. It was a clear, cool Tuesday. I dressed in my favorite sapphire blue silk dress, a gift from my late husband, because if Eleanor Thorne was going to leave this world, she would do so with dignity. Clara arrived precisely at 3 p.m. She carried a small, sterilized medical kit. "Are you absolutely sure, Eleanor? There is no going back after this. The drugs will take hold in minutes." "I am sure," I said, my voice steady. "They have already killed me once. This is my chance to live." Under Clara's watchful eye, I swallowed the foul-tasting cocktail of sedatives and cardiodepressants. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my life. First, a heavy lethargy, then a deep, cold numbness spread from my chest outwards. My vision tunneled. Clara, with the efficiency of a seasoned nurse, monitored my almost non-existent pulse and shallow respirations, charting them carefully. Pulse is 30. Respiration 3 per minute? "Eleanor, can you hear me?" I wanted to answer, but my voice was trapped. "I could only blink once." "Good. Stay with me. It's working." I lost consciousness exactly at 3:47 p.m. I woke to the jarring sound of a siren, the muffled voices of paramedics, and the distinct scent of disinfectant. Clara was standing over me, her face pale but resolute. "They've declared you dead, Eleanor. Sudden myocardial infarction. Quick, painless, perfect." The world tilted. Eleanor Thorne was legally gone. The subsequent hours were a blur of calculated chaos. Dr. Hayes, Clara's contact, successfully intercepted my body at the city morgue. He completed the paperwork and signed the death certificate. That same night, under the cover of darkness and a false ID, I was secretly moved from the morgue back to Clara's house and into the hidden room in her basement, my new fortress. The first piece of evidence was the recorded phone call. Clara had made the call to Victor immediately after the body was transported. I watched the video recording of Victor answering his phone at his high-rise law firm. "Victor, it's Clara. I have devastating news. Your mother, she's gone." Silence. A long, agonizing silence. Then a sharp intake of breath, not of grief but of relief, followed by a theatrical sigh. "Oh my God, Clara. How? When?" Victor's voice was a practiced performance of shock, utterly lacking the spontaneous pain of a truly grieving son. "A heart attack." The paramedic said it was immediate. "She didn't suffer, I see. Thank you for calling. Serafina and I will handle all the arrangements. It's a terrible shock, but Mother had been stressed lately. It was just her time, I suppose." Her time. He accepted my death and immediately began constructing a convenient narrative of my failing health. I pressed my face against my knees, trying to absorb the cold, heartless ease with which he dismissed my life. The next day, the real horror began. Through Clara's laptop, I watched my house. Around noon they arrived. Victor, Serafina, Robert, and Clarissa. They entered like a raiding party. There were no hushed tones, no reverent movements, no tears. Just a collective, palpable sigh of greedy satisfaction. "Well, finally," Clarissa declared, dropping her expensive handbag onto the sofa. "I didn't think that stubborn old woman would ever let go." "Clarissa, please," Victor warned, but his tone was a lazy correction, not a censure. "Let's be practical. The clock is ticking. The sooner we get the inventory, the sooner the real estate agent can list the place." They swarmed. Serafina immediately rifled through my bedroom, dismissing my late husband's antique watch as too sentimental, and only pausing to appraise my mother's small diamond pendant. Robert headed straight for my study, tearing through my filing cabinets in search of the savings passbooks. I watched in silent fury as Victor sat in my armchair, the very armchair I used to read him stories in, and calculated their victory. He found the bank statements. Here we are. Northwood Bank. Checking, $15,000. Savings, $50,000. And the insurance policy? Victor trailed off, the corners of his mouth lifting in a subtle, cruel smile. Exactly $100,000. Sole beneficiary, me. Excellent, Serafina purred, embracing Victor. The penthouse is within reach. The worst was when Robert found a faded photo of the five of us from a family vacation, a precious memory I cherished. Without a moment's hesitation, he crumpled it and tossed it into the nearest trash can. Sentimental garbage, he muttered. My death was not a tragedy to them. It was a cleanup operation. I watched as Victor called the insurance agent and the realtor, detailing the urgent, natural death and requesting the fastest possible payout. My dignity was incinerated when Serafina asked about the funeral. Simple cremation, Victor replied, already moving on to the next task. No visitation, no viewing. It's faster, cheaper, and avoids unnecessary questions. I had to intervene. I had to let them complete their greedy process. I had to let them dig their own graves. But the knowledge that they were stealing even my dignity in death cemented my final devastating plan. The resurrection. The basement room became my war room. The walls, paneled in dark wood, offered absolute privacy, but the glowing screens of Clara's high-tech surveillance system offered me an unflinching 360-degree view of their entire conspiracy. I realized my initial evidence was only the tip of a massive poisonous iceberg. I needed months of context, not just one conversation. My focus shifted from mourning to documentation. Every cold word, every financial maneuver, every callous laugh was recorded, time-stamped, and cataloged. Clara, with her background in meticulous medical record-keeping, was the perfect partner. We even managed to secure additional cameras in Robert's home and a microphone discreetly placed in Victor's car, offering a horrifying window into their inner world. One afternoon, I heard Victor on a phone call with his bank's collections department. He was not a successful lawyer. He was a desperate man on the brink of financial collapse. Yes, I know the interest rate is punitive, Victor hissed into the phone. But I told you I have an expected liquidity event this week. The funds are guaranteed. Just hold the repossession notice on the condo for 72 hours. I'm waiting for the insurance payout. He was gambling his entire life on my death. The realization wasn't satisfying. It was deeply tragic. My son had valued a debt-free condo more than his own mother's heartbeat. The following day brought a new level of depravity. Serafina and Clarissa met for lunch at an exclusive country club, and Clara's discreet microphone picked up every cruel syllable. Honestly, I feel lighter, Serafina confessed, stirring her martini. That constant pull of obligation, having to feign respect for that relic. Victor can finally drop the mask. It was genius of Robert to suggest the natural accident angle, Clarissa purred. An older woman in her 60s dying suddenly? Who would ever look twice? And that life insurance policy Victor convinced her to sign? Perfect. And the best part is, we all win, Serafina concluded, a triumphant smile stretching her lips. You and Robert get your investment back, and Victor and I get the penthouse. Hearing them refer to me as a relic and a pull of obligation after decades of unconditional devotion snapped the last fragile thread of maternal affection in my heart. The time for sorrow was over. It was time for absolute, undeniable justice. I knew a televised confrontation would create chaos, but it was the only way to prevent them from fabricating an alternative story, claiming the recordings were doctored or that I was mentally unstable. I needed the weight of a credible media personality. Clara connected me with Isabelle Rossi, an investigative journalist at Channel 12 News, known for her tenacity and uncompromising pursuit of truth. Isabelle agreed to meet us in the dead of night, slipping into Clara's house like a spy. I laid out the entire narrative, the sacrifice, the discovery in the car, the debt, the heartless division of assets, and the natural accident plot. Then I played the recordings. Isabelle, a woman who had seen the darkest corners of human nature, listened intently. Her professional skepticism melted away, replaced by genuine horror and righteous indignation. She watched the footage of Victor calculating the insurance payout and Serafina calling me a relic. "Mrs. Thorne," Isabelle said, her voice shaking slightly. "If this is real, it's not just the story of the year. It's the story of a lifetime." I handed her the transcripts and the audio files. "It's all real. They plan to meet this Saturday afternoon at my house for the formal reading of the will, a final, grotesque celebration before the funds are dispersed." Isabelle closed her notebook with a sharp snap. "We will be there. We will bring the cameras, the sound equipment, and the police. We will make sure your resurrection is the most public, most humiliating moment of their lives." The stage was set. Over the next 3 days, Isabelle and her team worked with the precinct chief to secure warrants for conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. The police would wait outside, ready to move the moment the cameras captured the confession. I was no longer a ghost. I was the conductor of a magnificent, terrible symphony of justice. The week crawled by with agonizing slowness, each hour an eternity of anticipation. From the depths of Clara's basement, I watched my house being prepared for sale, my life being systematically boxed up and labeled estate items. The realtor held an open house, and I watched strangers critique the very walls I had painted. The garden I had tended. Victor, meanwhile, maintained a facade of weary grief, giving short, somber statements to colleagues about the sudden, tragic loss. But the hidden microphone in his office captured his true thoughts. He was obsessed with the insurance payout, calling the company multiple times a day. "Listen, the death certificate is clean," I heard him snap at an agent. "Natural causes, no autopsy. Just wire the $100,000 to the estate account immediately. This is time-sensitive." His lack of emotion was not just appalling. It was a testament to his utter moral bankruptcy. The final piece of preparation was the most symbolic. Isabelle asked me what I wanted to wear for my resurrection. I didn't hesitate. I retrieved the deep emerald green dress, the only truly extravagant purchase I had ever allowed myself, which I wore once, years ago, to Victor's high school graduation. It was the color of defiance, the color of life returning to the dead earth. On Friday night, Victor called his entire family, confirming the gathering. "Tomorrow, 2 p.m. at Mother's house. The estate attorney will be there to officially read the will and sign the final release forms. Bring ID." The lie was elaborate. There was no attorney, only a stack of fake documents Victor had prepared to make the looting feel official. I spent the night pacing the small perimeter of the basement room, my mind a whirl of memories. I kept picturing Victor as a small boy, running into my arms after school. The hardest part of the entire ordeal wasn't the fear of death, but the death of that memory, the final, irreversible recognition that the boy I raised was gone, replaced by a greedy predator. Saturday morning arrived, stark and brilliant. I dressed slowly in the green dress, the silk cool against my skin. I applied a touch of lipstick, a detail of defiance. If I was going to be a ghost, I would be a beautiful, formidable one. At 1:30 p.m., Isabelle and her crew arrived, accompanied by 2 undercover police officers. The energy in Clara's living room was electric. "Mrs. Thorne," Isabelle said, checking her microphone pack, "we are going live on air the moment we step through that door. There's no turning back. Are you prepared for the confrontation?" "They stopped being my family the moment they plotted my death," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "I am prepared to watch them face justice." We watched the surveillance feed as the cars arrived. Robert and Clarissa pulled up first, looking eager and slightly disheveled. They rushed inside, almost bumping into each other in their haste. Victor and Serafina arrived next, looking composed, Victor carrying a sleek leather briefcase containing his fraudulent documents. They settled into my living room. Victor took his spot in the armchair. Robert and Clarissa claimed the sofa, Clarissa clutching a notebook and pen, ready to tally her spoils. Victor began with a practiced, solemn throat clearing. "We are here to finalize the estate of Eleanor Thorne. As the sole heir, I have a moral obligation to ensure the remaining family is compensated for their support and cooperation." I looked at Isabelle and nodded. "It's time." The silence on the walk from Clara's house to my own felt deafening. The cameras rolled. The sound technician checked his levels. My key turning in the lock sounded like a gunshot. The noise made them jump. They stopped mid-sentence. "Did you hear that?" Clarissa whispered nervously. I pushed the door open and stepped across the threshold of my home. The cameras followed, illuminating the dark living room. When I appeared in the doorway, the scene froze. Serafina saw me first. Her face melted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She let out a guttural shriek that scraped the silence. Victor stood up so fast he knocked over the reading lamp. His eyes were wide, vacant. "Mother, but you're dead! We saw the death certificate." Clarissa began to wail hysterically. "It's a ghost. Robert, it's a terrifying spirit." I walked slowly into the center of the room. My emerald dress a stark contrast to the darkness of their intent. "Hello, my dearest family," I said, my voice cutting through the hysteria, calm and utterly ruthless. "I hope I haven't interrupted anything important." Isabelle stepped in behind me, holding a microphone branded with the Channel 12 logo. "Good afternoon. I'm Isabelle Rossi, and we are broadcasting live from the home of Eleanor Thorne, a woman who, according to state records, died 3 days ago." Victor finally found his voice, a raw, desperate croak. "What is the meaning of this?" "Get out of my house! This is a criminal intrusion." "Your house, Victor?" I countered, raising an eyebrow. "I seem to recall this property belonging to your supposedly deceased mother. Perhaps you could explain to our audience why you are gathered here today?" We were discussing her final wishes, her will," Serafina stammered, her composure utterly shattered. "Ah, yes, final wishes," I said, stepping closer to Victor. "And one of those wishes was, I believe, for you to arrange a quick, cheap cremation to save money. Is that right, Serafina?" Serafina stumbled backward, clutching her throat. The camera captured the exact moment her terror confirmed my accusation. "Mr. Thorne, you were pronounced dead on Tuesday," Isabelle interjected, turning the microphone toward me. "Can you tell our viewers what led to this extraordinary resurrection?" I looked directly into the lens, my heart thumping a steady rhythm of justice. "I was forced to fake my own death because the people in this room, my son, my daughter-in-law, my brother, and my sister-in-law, conspired to murder me for financial gain. That's insane." "That's a slanderous lie," Victor screamed, his face contorted with panic. "A lie, Victor?" I reached into my small clutch and produced the audio recording device. "Let's see if this sounds like a lie." I pressed play. The room filled with the sickening sound of their cold voices from the sedan. "The plan is solid. Mother will have a fall. A very simple, very believable slip on the landing. Stairs. The house alone is appraised at nearly $300,000. That's enough to clear the debt and put the down payment on the ocean view. Penthouse? Robert and Clarissa are still on board, right? They understand the split. They're desperate enough to take their cut." As the voices played, the air crackled with their shame. Victor collapsed back into the armchair, his face buried in his hands. Serafina was sobbing, a high-pitched, self-pitying sound. Robert and Clarissa stared blankly at the wall, their greedy dreams dissolving before their eyes. That was edited," Clarissa weakly offered. "Was it, Clarissa?" I asked, playing the second recording, the one from the country club lunch. I feel lighter. "That constant pull of obligation, having to feign respect for that relic. It was genius of Robert to suggest the natural accident angle. Who would ever look twice?" Robert, my own brother, finally looked at me, his eyes full of fear, not remorse. "Eleanor, this is a terrible misunderstanding. We never intended to." "You never intended to, Robert?" I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Then why were you standing here minutes ago with your notebook, ready to count your share of my life insurance policy? Why did Victor call the agent yesterday demanding the funds be wired immediately?" I motioned to the police officers. "Officers, I believe you have enough evidence for conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and several counts of grand theft. The two uniformed officers stepped forward. Victor Thorne, Serafina Thorne, Robert Vance, and Clarissa Vance. You are under arrest. The scene erupted into chaos. Serafina screamed the name of her lawyer. Victor, suddenly reduced from high-powered attorney to criminal defendant, stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. You will regret this, mother. This is an act of war, Victor spat out as the handcuffs were snapped onto his wrists. No, Victor, I said, leaning in close, my voice low and firm. This is not war. This is justice. You forfeited your right to be my son the moment you decided my life was worth less than a luxury apartment. As they were led away, the cameras followed their every stumble and every tear of panic. I turned back to the camera, my face streaked with tears that were not tears of sorrow, but of fierce, devastating release. The ensuing days were a whirlwind that shattered the quiet anonymity of my life. My story, dubbed The Resurrection of Thorne, went globally viral. I became an overnight symbol of maternal sacrifice betrayed and the ultimate fight against human greed. The news coverage was relentless, and the social media commentary was a tidal wave of outrage and support. I gave my exclusive interview to Isabelle Rossi, narrating the decades of sacrifice, the selling of my jewelry, the grueling work hours, and the quiet, desperate hope I held for my son's future. The public narrative, the perfect, heartless betrayal, was complete. The legal battle, however, was far from simple. Despite the undeniable recordings, Victor, Serafina, Robert, and Clarissa pleaded not guilty. Their defense strategy was meticulously calculated: gaslighting and character assassination. Their lawyers, expensive, ruthless professionals, argued that the recordings were illegally obtained, manipulated, and that I, Eleanor Thorne, was not a victim but a manipulative, controlling matriarch driven insane by isolation and maternal resentment. Mrs. Thorne, Victor's lawyer, a slick man named Mr. Harrington, argued during the pretrial hearing, was known to weaponize her sacrifices. She held her son's success as a leash, making him feel guilty for striving for a life that was finally free of her toxic control. Her death was not a plot against her, but a desperate, elaborate cry for attention, intended to emotionally blackmail her own son. Hearing my life's unconditional love twisted into a psychological weapon was almost as painful as the betrayal itself. They painted me as the villain, the controlling, unstable mother whose erratic behavior justified their attempts to distance themselves and their desire for financial independence. I knew I had to testify with absolute emotional clarity and devastating detail. On the stand, I looked directly at the jury, a panel of men and women, many of them parents themselves, and spoke not just as a victim, but as a mother. I sold my wedding ring, the last memory of my late husband, to buy my son a computer for school, I testified, my voice firm but laced with emotion. I worked double shifts, risking my health so he would never feel shame among his wealthy classmates. I never, not once, asked for repayment. I hid the sacrifice so he would feel free. If that is toxic control, then every parent who has ever put their child's needs before their own is a manipulator. I detailed the discovery in the car, the fear and the final necessary act of faking my death. The prosecutor then played the full unedited recordings. When Victor's voice was heard casually discussing my fall, and Serafina's laughter at the idea of me as a relic, the air in the courtroom became heavy with revulsion. Jurors dabbed their eyes. The turning point came when the prosecutor played the recording of Victor demanding the insurance payout just hours after my death was confirmed. Mr. Thorne? The prosecutor asked. Does a devoted son, mourning the tragic loss of his mother, usually prioritize the immediate liquidation of her assets over planning a dignified funeral? Victor, on the stand, crumbled. He had maintained a professional composure throughout the trial, but the weight of the evidence, the public humiliation, and the sight of his own callous calculation broke him. He simply stared at me, his eyes now vacant of hatred, replaced by a hollow, terrifying despair. The trial lasted 3 harrowing weeks. I spent every day watching my life and my love picked apart, piece by piece. But I held fast to the singular truth. I was fighting for my life, and for the principle that love and sacrifice should not be rewarded with a conspiracy. The jury deliberation was surprisingly swift, only 4 hours. When the foreman stood to read the verdict, the courtroom fell silent, the tension almost unbearable. Guilty. Guilty on all counts: conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, grand theft, and insurance fraud. The sentences were severe, reflecting the calculated coldness and the financial motive behind the crime. Victor Thorne received 25 years in state prison, eligible for parole in 18. Serafina Thorne received 15 years. Robert Vance was sentenced to 10 years, and Clarissa Vance received 8 years, acknowledging their essential but less active roles in the plot's planning stages. As the judge delivered the final sentences, none of them looked at me. They stared straight ahead, finally facing the devastating, concrete reality that their greed had utterly destroyed their lives. After the court adjourned, I requested a private moment with Victor before the correctional officers took him away. I walked up to the glass partition, facing the shattered remnants of my son. He was weeping silently, his shoulders shaking. "Mother," he whispered through the intercom, his voice a broken thing. I don't know who I became. It was Serafina. It was the debt, Victor? I asked, my voice devoid of anger, just an infinite sadness. Or was it the greed that always lay beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge? I stared into his eyes, searching for the slightest flicker of the boy who loved my honey almond cake. I gave you my life, Victor. I gave you every single thing I had, including the chance to be a good man. You chose to use that foundation to build a future based on my murder. I love you, Mother. I always did, he pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Do you love someone you plan to kill for a mortgage payment? I challenged him gently. Love is sacrifice, Victor, not calculation. You valued money more than my heartbeat. Now, you have plenty of time to contemplate that choice. I placed my hand on the cold glass barrier. I hope, truly hope, that these years give you the chance to find the good person you were meant to be. I am not forgiving you, Victor, but I am releasing you. I am releasing myself from the crippling responsibility of your choices. I walked away without looking back. Those were the last words I ever exchanged with my son. The act was a final severing, a necessary, painful amputation of a relationship that had become poisonous. The mother in me was finally laid to rest, and Eleanor, the survivor, was truly born. The immediate relief after the trial was immense, but it was quickly followed by a profound emptiness. Justice had been served, but my life, the life I had built for 62 years, was fundamentally gone. I was famous, wealthy, from the insurance policy which I claimed and the sale of the house, but utterly alone. I couldn't stay in the house. Every creaking stair, every shadow in the living room reminded me of their betrayal and my own fear. I sold the house, the mausoleum, to a young, hopeful family. I kept only 2 things, the photo of my late husband and the emerald green dress. My next step was not to hoard the wealth they had craved. It was to use it to negate their evil, to make their entire scheme utterly worthless. The most cathartic decision of my new life was to dispose of the wealth. The money they had plotted murder for was tainted, a constant reminder of their avarice. I established the Eleanor Thorne Foundation for Single Mothers in Education. I immediately donated the entire $300,000 from the house sale and the $50,000 in savings to this foundation. The $100,000 insurance policy, the ultimate prize for their conspiracy, was used to establish an endowed scholarship fund named after my late husband, Robert. My purpose was simple. If my money was what motivated them to kill, then I would ensure that money was used to save and elevate other mothers and children, giving them the exact opportunities I had fought so hard to create for Victor. Every year, 5 working single mothers receive full financial assistance to send their children to college. The response from the public and the foundation recipients was overwhelming. I received thousands of letters, not just of sympathy, but of shared experience. Mothers betrayed, siblings abandoned, elderly parents exploited for their assets. I realized I was not alone. My story had become a beacon for silent victims of familial greed everywhere. I moved to a small, quiet coastal town in Oregon. I bought a small one-story cottage with a view of the Pacific, no steep staircases. I was finally building a home for Eleanor, not for Victor. My most significant connection came from one of those letters. Gabrielle, a woman in her late 50s, had been placed in a substandard nursing home by her only daughter, who had systematically drained Gabrielle's savings. Gabrielle's story mirrored mine. The daughter, like Victor, was driven by debt and a sense of entitlement. Gabrielle and I met and immediately recognized kindred spirits. We had both been discarded, but we had both survived with our dignity intact. We formed an immediate, fierce bond, the kind of unconditional love and loyalty I had craved from my own blood. We founded a small, informal support group for other survivors of elder financial abuse and parental abandonment. We called ourselves the Phoenix Circle. In that circle, I found my new family. They were not connected by blood, but by shared pain and a mutual commitment to rebuild. My transformation was total. The money and the notoriety had given me a voice, and I used it relentlessly. I became an activist, lobbying state legislators for stronger elder protection laws and speaking out against the normalization of adult children feeling entitled to their parents' wealth. The peace I found was not the absence of memory, but the ability to transform the pain into purpose. Every scholarship granted, every law passed was a direct negation of Victor's plot. I was living proof that even the most profound hurt can be redeemed. Despite my new life, the past sometimes sent unwelcome echoes. I received periodic letters from Victor, filtered through the prison system. They were initially filled with self-pity, then pleas for forgiveness, and finally, vague threats veiled in spiritual awakening language. I never responded. My final farewell at the prison barrier was final. Robert and Clarissa, upon release after serving 2/3 of their sentences, found themselves destitute and ostracized. Their photos, along with Victor and Serafina's, were permanently etched into the public consciousness as symbols of familial treachery. No one would hire them. No bank would lend to them. They were forced to live in poverty, a bleak, ironic echo of the hardship I had worked so hard to spare my own brother from. Serafina, serving her time, quickly divorced Victor, claiming she had been coerced by his dominating personality and the pressure of his debt. She was trying to salvage a life, but the notoriety of the resurrection of Thorne followed her like a shadow. My focus remained on the foundation. One day, a young scholarship recipient named Leah came to meet me. She was a single mother working 2 jobs to put her son through medical school. She reminded me so much of myself 3 decades ago. "Mrs. Thorne," Leah said, tears in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you. This scholarship is saving my son's future. It's saving my life." I smiled. A genuine, warm smile that came from the depths of my being. "Leah, you don't thank me. You pay it forward. You ensure that your son never has to make the choices Victor made. You teach him that love is the only true currency. This was the redemption. This was the final total defeat of Victor's plot." I continued to write too. My memoir, detailing the entire ordeal, from the backseat of the sedan to the public trial, became a bestseller. The proceeds went directly into the foundation. The book and the resulting documentary ensured that the moral lesson of my life, the toxic dangers of entitlement and greed, was taught to millions. The fame was uncomfortable, but it provided a protective shield. No one could approach me with ill intent. I was constantly surrounded by the love and vigilance of the Phoenix Circle and the public's unwavering support. Clara and Gabrielle became my true family, my chosen sister and my chosen confidant. My life was quieter, richer in meaning, and infinitely more authentic. I realized that Victor and his conspirators, in trying to seize my money and end my life, had ultimately gifted me a freedom I never knew I lacked. the freedom to live only for my own integrity, not for the approval or love of others. The biggest sacrifice was not the money. It was the relinquishing of the dream of a perfect, grateful son. Once that dream was buried, my true life could begin. Years passed. The memory of the trial faded from the front pages, but the lessons of my story remained indelible in public consciousness. My work with the Phoenix Circle and the Foundation continued to be my driving purpose. Gabrielle and I, now in our late 60s, lived together in the coastal cottage, spending our days tending the small garden and planning fundraising galas for the foundation. We were two survivors, inseparable and fiercely protective of our tranquil new existence. One final, unexpected message arrived one winter morning. It was a note from the correctional facility, informing me that Victor had been transferred to a lower security prison and was eligible for a work release program. The note was accompanied by a brief, formal letter from Victor himself, the first in years without plea or defense. "Mother, I received your book. I read the section about the honey almond cake recipe. I want you to know that I finally understand. I pray you found the peace I destroyed. Victor." It was the closest thing to genuine remorse I had ever received from him. The reference to the cake was not about the flavor, but about the memory of the childhood love he had sacrificed for the debt. He had finally seen the value of what he had thrown away. I closed the letter, felt a sharp, brief ache, and then placed it on the small stack of papers I would never destroy, a record of my full journey. I realized then that my journey wasn't about vengeance. It was about redemption. My redemption was not his forgiveness, but the healing of my own soul. I had taken the most profound evil and converted it into lasting, measurable good. I had rebuilt my life on a foundation of integrity, and that foundation was unshakable. The final legacy of my story is this enduring truth. You cannot control the greed in the hearts of others, even those you love most fiercely. But you can absolutely control your response to it. You can choose to be crushed by the betrayal, or you can choose to rise, phoenix-like, from the ashes, using the very heat of their avarice to forge a brighter future for yourself and for others. I am Eleanor Thorne. I survived my own death. I survived the loss of my son, and in that survival, I finally found a purpose greater than the love I had sacrificed. I found a love that was chosen, eternal, and truly unconditional.